Yeah,
Yes, sir, ready.
a very good evening to the esteemed speakers for today, Advocate Raghavan ji from Chennai, Ashish ji, Chairman Ahmedabad Branch CA Harit Dariwal, Vice Chairman CA Bhishan Shah, the Coordinator CA Tapas, and my dear friends. Welcome to this unique session on how to read judgments. Let's begin the session with ICI motto. I request each one of you to place your hand on your heart for ICI motto.
य एष सुप्तेषु जागृति य एष सुप्तेषु जागृति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता
Thank you, Shehzad Bhai. Welcome back. I would request now the Chairman of Ahmedabad Branch, C. Harit Dariwal, to give opening remark for today's session.
Thank you, Anjali Ben. Very respected Advocate Raghavan ji, the faculty for the session, also Ashish ji, the Vice Chairman of the branch, Bhishan Bhai, Secretary Anjali Ben, all the participants. Very good evening to all of you. Let me welcome you to one of the very rare sessions, I will say, because normally we are so much used to attending the technical sessions. There is something which is focusing on a skill development, especially reading judgments. And what we all have the habit of asking the gist of the section of the judgment, but we don't have the habit of reading the judgment. I think today, I'm sure after today's session, we all will be, even looking forward to reading the judgments, analyzing them in our own way. And that is what the real skill as a chartered accountant. So thank you to both the faculty, sir, for sparing your valuable time today. I'll just update on the few important activities of the branch. We have a very interesting national conference on MSME starting from tomorrow. It is the first ever national conference on MSME. And those who want to practice in this area, we have everything right from the MSME Act to the funding to SME listing to even the marketing of the what we can help the our clients on the MSME front. So very good, very well drafted MSME conference, I will say. We have a 4-day series, and we are also expecting Saurabh Patel, sir, Saurabh Patel, who is the Energy Minister of Gujarat, to address us on 27th of June. It's an International MSME Day. So please do register for this conference. We have limited seats left. We already have more than 1100 registrations. So I would request all of you to take advantage of it. We also have a very interesting series called Opportune. A lot of young members have enrolled for this. It's basically to provide you a platform to groom yourself as a speaker. So if you want to take that advantage, please do register for that. We have a vaccination drive going on at our branch. So as of now, today also we started with more than 100 people got vaccinated. So we have vaccination drives from 25th, that is from tomorrow till 29th. So if you want to take benefit of the vaccination, please do register it at our branch premises only. And apart from this, yes, the GST workshop is going on. Tomorrow we have very interesting sessions. We have a panel discussion. Bhishan Bhai is one of the panelists also tomorrow. So please do take advantage of the GST series. And last but not the least, yes, our M73, the movement 73 that we had all started very well. I think it's completed 65 days now. It's getting to near its completion in the way everybody is appreciating the movement. I would still request, if you have not joined, you can still join, get all the recording and start doing your exercises at your home. So thank you once again to all of you for such an active participation at Ahmedabad branch, and special thanks to both the faculties for sparing the valuable time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for the important updates. Look forward to see you all tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock for the MSME series. With this, now I request Vice Chairman C. Bhishan Shah and the Chairman for the Indirect Tax Committee to take the session ahead.
Thank you very much, Anjali ma'am, Secretary of the Ahmedabad branch, Chairman, respected Chairman of Ahmedabad branch, and learned faculties. Yes, it's immense pleasure that we are having such a visionary chairman who gives us 360-degree growth. So say fitness, say knowledge dissemination, even how to read the judgments, how to use the technology, and how to advise the client so far as the MSME is concerned. Everything is there for our members. So thanks, Chairman, sir. And yes, today's learned faculty, Raghavan sir, we all see the judgments when they come or publish on TIOL or on Taxman, and we see that we ask everyone that what's the crux. So a person or expert gives us 2-3 line decision कि भाई in this judgment whether it appeal is allowed or not, or whether the GST will be applicable or not. But we don't incline ourselves to read this 100 pages or 200 pages. But I'm sure with your help and guidance, now onwards, all the participants who have joined will be easily able to read the judgment and digest the judgments. So with our learned faculty, Ashish Bhai Thakkar, we all are, having a drafting or a sense or submission sense, but we don't know how to draft in a better way, which give a perfect communication to the reader of that draft. And I'm sure with the help of Ashish Bhai, we will also able to nurture that art in all of us. With these words, I welcome all the participants, and I now request CA Tapas Ruparelia to give introduction of Raghavan sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bishan Bhai. Respected Chairman C. R. Dariwal, Vice Chairman Bishan sir, and Secretary Anjali ma'am. Faculties for today, Raghavan sir and Ashish sir, thank you very much for joining us today. And all dear participants, thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce our today's one of the faculty, Raghavan sir, whom I've been following a lot for his knowledge on ACG and EOU, particularly. As an introduction, Mr. Raghavan Ramabhadran is a chartered accountant turned lawyer, currently heading the direct tax and indirect tax practices at Chennai of the law firm Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan. He also handles corporate litigation matters before various high courts. Raghavan sir has worked extensively in both advisory and litigation verticals of the firm during the past 16 years. He has been extensively involved in handling litigation before various high courts and tribunals, and also advises clients on efficient handling of litigation matters. He has also led teams in conducting tax compliance reviews and GST implementation studies for many companies, including certain Navratna and Fortune 500 companies. He has handled sensitive arbitration matters and cases relating to the Black Money Act. He is a prolific speaker and regularly delivers lectures on various topics related to indirect taxes. To his credit, he is adjudged as an indirect tax leader for the Asia region, and in the year 2017, and in the year 2020, he has been awarded as a Rising Star of the Year under 40 by Legal Era. So with this background, I think I'll hand it over to Raghavan sir, this important session on how to read and analyze judgment. It is really important for all professionals like us who have a habit of reading only the headlines provided by TMI or TIOL or Excus, and then realize that what we were actually looking for in the judgment is not relevant for us. I think that's the one key point that I would be looking forward in this session delivered by Raghavan sir today. Over to you, sir.
Very good evening to all of you, and thank you very much, Tapas, for the detailed introduction. I want to first congratulate the branch, especially the chairman and other people who is now handling this branch, because I was impressed from the initial announcements. The announcements, whatever is happening for this particular week alone, is so impressive. That shows how active the whole branch is, and I can only see young and energetic faces in top posts in this branch. I think if we have to take one leaf out of this branch, at least we want to inculcate this kind of energy in all other places so that our institute reaches greater heights. I say this specifically because though I am practicing as an advocate, I started my career as a chartered accountant, so I still believe I am a chartered accountant. You can't push me out of the profession. So I'm still there. So thank you very much for the introduction again. And I really want to commend the person who identified this as a topic. I know skill development, etc., but this is one topic which is so critical, and many a times this gets missed. Recently, I was reading an article by a journalist, and the journalist was talking about his recent interviews of various other journalists where he wanted to take them for a post. He said, one question which I asked all the candidates was, how do they keep up with the current news happening around the world? How will they keep themselves abreast of it? He said 90% of the candidates said they read in shorts. And immediately once they say, I read in shorts, he used to remove them from the selection and he will not select them at all. Then I realized it is not true only for journalists. It is true everywhere. It is true everywhere. What we want is, we want those 2-3 lines of headlines. We want to understand. Rest is left to our imagination. We believe the headlines is the gospel truth, the ultimate truth. And then whatever is there based on the headlines, we interpret ourselves. This would have been the case. That's why this headlines has come. And our mind, we cheat our mind. So the mind starts believing that this is the news. It's okay if we get influenced by these headlines in our normal life. But when it comes to profession, what happens is all these wrong understandings of us doesn't stop with us. We advise clients, the client take decisions based on what we say, and it's whole business which is dependent on your advice. If we are all responsible professionals. So if you go only with the headlines and we start telling people that this is how you should do, that is how you should do, etc., it is possible that it's not us, but somebody else may suffer in the future, which is much, much more critical. Therefore, it is important for us to understand how to read a judgment and what can be read from a judgment, what cannot be read from a judgment, what are the parts of the judgment we need not read, or even if you read, it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily follow that. So there is a whole lot of jurisprudence on that point. So in fact, it was a good opportunity for me to do a rehash of whatever I had learned in the past and also learn a lot of new things in this topic, because this is slightly off the path which we regularly tread. So it was very refreshing for me as well. So for that purpose also, I should thank the organizers. I would directly plunge into the slides which we have made for this purpose. I felt that the PPT would help because we are going to have around 70-75 minutes of conversation on this particular topic itself. So it will help us to keep the focus on the topic. Yes. So the topic for the day is how to read and analyze and understand judgments. And we are particularly seeing from a tax perspective. The way I want to proceed in this whole discussion is first, I want to discuss on what is the meaning of judgment, what we can call as a judgment. What are the various constituents of a judgment, various parts, what all it constitutes. Then these Latin phrases like ratio decidendi, obiter dicta, what all it mean. Then I don't want to stop only with that. I want to also get into how to interpret a judgment. Interpret as in what we can take from a judgment when we read it and what we cannot. So that also we need to see. That will also take us into the binding nature of precedents, the exceptions to the binding nature of precedents, then the certain principles involved in it, and then we will end up with our concluding remarks. This is how I want to proceed. I hope all of you are fine with this kind of presentation. No, we all very casually talk every day. We say that yesterday the Gujarat High Court has passed a judgment. Somebody says, yes, maine bhi wo order dekha. So what is an order? What is judgment? We keep saying judgment, order, decision aaya hai. what is decision? Are these all synonymous, or do they really carry a meaning? Are they different? If I want to be precise in my speech, then should I use the correct word? Which would be the right word? Should I say a judgment has come? Should I say an order has come? So if you just take a peep into this aspect, judgment has a definite meaning. Like you can, it's not as if we have another judgment to say what a judgment is, but there is an understanding on what a judgment is. Judgment is a decision of the court. There is no difficulty. It decides the rights and liabilities of parties in a legal proceeding. And it not only decides, it not only expresses its mind or its opinion on what ought to be the conclusion of the proceeding. It also goes to a further step and then gives its reasons, the legal reasoning and the explanation for arriving at such a conclusion. And once this is passed, this decision is taken along with the explanation, it concludes, it resolves all the disputes involved in the case. So decision means something which gives a finality to the legal proceedings. So therefore, if you can see what are the essential things which we need to look up to decide whether something is a judgment or not, we need to see whether it is a final decision taken in the matter. And it should once for all resolve the dispute which is part of the legal proceeding. It should decide the rights and liabilities of parties. If it does, it is called a judgment. What is an order? Order need not do all these things. In other words, order will not bring a closure to the entire legal proceeding. During the course of legal proceedings, many orders may be passed. An order may be passed saying your additional submissions will be allowed. An order may be passed saying I dispense you from filing the original copy of the impugned order. An order may be passed saying I will grant an interim injunction in the matter. An order may be passed saying an additional party can be impleaded into the matter. These are all orders. Orders means the court says, I approve this. That is an order. But that need not finally decide the dispute between the parties. Once an order is passed, it need not necessarily mean that the case has been decided. No. Orders are passed in the course of the legal proceedings. It can be passed any stage, and more interestingly, an order may also be part of a judgment. The judgment will also contain an order part. Including the order part only, we call it as a judgment. So is judgment same as an order? No. Many orders may be passed in a case before a final judgment is reached. It also refers to the operative portion of the order. So when it decides the entire matter, in the judgment, when they say this, there they say, therefore, I say the appeal is dismissed. Then appeal is dismissed is an order. The order portion forms part of the judgment. So therefore, order is something which is less than a judgment, in a manner of speech, because judgment partakes within itself an order also. So an order may be part of judgment, but a judgment will not be there as a part of an order. So this is the main difference between a judgment and an order. Let us see an example. Let us say a court holds, we wish such a judgment comes in future, but let us hypothetically, let us live in this kind of a thought, a fantasy. A court holds that ITC can be availed on CSR expenses. It says ITC can be availed on CSR expenses. The reason is because it is used in the course of furtherance of business, and it won't be treated as a gift because it has to be mandatorily given by the provisions of the Companies Act. You have 135 and all. So suppose a court passes such a judgment, then what is the order portion in the judgment? The order portion is ITC can be availed on CSR expenses. But what constitutes a judgment? ITC can be taken on CSR expenses because it gives the explanation or reasoning. That explanation or reasoning is the judgment portion, because CSR expenses are incurred in the course of furtherance of business. It is also mandated under the Companies Act. Therefore, it cannot be treated as a gift. So the reasoning or explanation which is ensuing an order portion is called a judgment. But casually when we speak, we say judgment. By judgment, we refer to the document. That is also there. The full document which contains the order and all reasoning, everything is called judgment. But accurately, if you see, judgment is the reasoning part. Order is the ultimately whatever the court decides. That is usually called as an order. Then we also come across a word called decree. So what is a decree? What is the order? What is the judgment? If you see the CPC, Civil Procedure Code, decree is defined, order is defined, judgment is defined. In section 2, subsection 2 of the CPC, decree is the formal expression of an adjudication, which so far as regard the court expressing it, conclusively determines the rights and liabilities of the parties with regard to all or any of the matters in controversy in a suit. So therefore, decree is defined as something which also finally decides the rights and liabilities of the parties. The order is also a formal expression, but it only gives the decision which is passed, and it is not a decree in the sense that it does not conclusively determine the rights and liabilities of the parties. Judgment means a statement given by a judge of the grounds of the decree or order. So therefore, the statement which is given by the judge in a decree or order is called a judgment insofar as the CPC is concerned. But if we talk about taxation, we don't have anything called as a decree. So usually that decree also gets merged into what we call as a judgment. So here we have an order or a judgment, and both are decisions. So the order is also a decision, judgment is also a decision. Order can be a part of the judgment, or it can be passed during the course of the proceedings. But judgment is the final decision of the court where it decides the rights and liabilities of parties. These are the various differences between these two. As I said, there can be different types of orders. I request participants to key in your questions in the Q&A column which we have, because I see a few people also raising hands. I'll be happy to answer all of them. But to just keep the flow going, you can type it out in the Q&A column. I will definitely see them and answer in the course of my presentation. So there are different types of orders. As I say, final order, interim orders, stay orders. Now we all understand all these things in the context, because stay order is passed during the course of the proceeding, interim order is passed during the course of the proceeding, final order will be part of a judgment. So you can see this as example: final settlement of the dispute contains detailed reasoning behind the order, high precedential value as the reasoning can be relied on. Interim orders are interim relief. This is given pending final order. I allow the goods, confiscated goods to be released. I remove the detention. So all these things can be decided at the interim stage without deciding the matter finally. Those are called interim orders. Then we have stay orders, where it says suspending the lower court's order. So we have come across all these things. We also very regularly talk about speaking and non-speaking order. What is a speaking order? What is a non-speaking order? So if you see the difference, the speaking order is one that contains a reason for arriving at a particular conclusion in the order. Every order should be a speaking order. There can be no order which cannot give the reasons at all. It should give the reasons. So every order should be a speaking order. So judicial authorities, courts are always expected to pass speaking orders. In fact, Supreme Court has also said that even administrative matters or quasi-judicial bodies, like you have adjudicating authorities, appellate authorities, we need not think that only high courts and Supreme Courts have to give reason. Tribunals, authorities, everyone, whenever they are passing an order which is blessed by a statute, all those people have to give reasons. Reason forms the lifeline of the entire matter, because if you have to go on appeal against that, you should know for what reason an order has been passed against you. So that is very, very important. It is a lifeline of the order. We also have a concept called verdict, but if you actually see, verdict is not there in the Indian context. It is not usually used in the Indian context, because verdict is the conclusion which is reached by a jury. And since India does not have a jury system, So verdict is not something we can casually use, but verdict is not something we have in the Indian legal context. So once I say there is a judgment, so what all are there as parts of the judgment? This is where we should very carefully see, is a head note a part of the judgment? When I say court has passed a judgment, do we say court has passed a judgment along with head notes, catch notes? Is it their duty at all to make our reading very easy? Should the court give the head notes and catch notes for us so that we can quickly glance through it and understand the order, understand the judgment? Definitely not. So head notes and catch notes actually do not form part of the judgment. But every judgment would usually state the facts, which they will narrate the facts. Then they will give the arguments which are advanced by either sides. Then if they have to rely on certain citations, references, case laws, all these things, they will give here as part of this. Then the court will arrive at a decision, and for that decision, they will give a complete reasoning or explanation. If the decision part is missing, then there is no conclusion to the matter. If the explanation part is missing, then we call it as a non-speaking order, because actually the judgment part itself is missing, the explanation part. So therefore, it would not stand scrutiny before any higher levels. So talking of this head notes again, in a criminal case before the Madras High Court noticed to its dismay that the trial court, when various decisions were cited in a very critical criminal matter, the trial court only referred to the head notes which were submitted by either parties and passed a judgment. The court was extremely displeased with such an approach, and they in fact deprecated the trial court for such approach. In fact, the Madras High Court notices further that this has become a practice everywhere. So this should be avoided. So head notes and catch notes, please remember, my dear friends, they are written by the publishers, not by the judges. We call taxman, we read taxman judgments, taxman gives a head note. That head note belongs to taxman. That means that head note is taxman's understanding of that judgment. That is not what the judge had said. Taxman understands that judgment as being stated in that fashion, which means you are getting a secondary understanding of the judgment. You are not understanding it to yourself. So don't substitute your skills with those of taxman and other people. Read the judgment yourself. Don't ever go by head note. In fact, we saw a peculiar case. We keep seeing it, but this is an example which we have taken in Sal Steel, which was decided by the Honorable Gujarat High Court, relating to the service tax levy on ocean freight. The court struck down the levy of service tax, no doubt, but the reason the court struck it down was the court said the notifications and rules were ultra vires the provisions of the Finance Act. Reading of 68(2)(2)(1)(d)(4), etc. Court said it is beyond the provisions of the Finance Act. But if you see the head note said the notification rule was struck down as ultra vires the Constitution of India. There is a huge difference between these two, because there is a difference between a levy which is illegal and a levy which is unconstitutional. When a levy is illegal, it means it is beyond the statute within whose framework it has to operate. When it is unconstitutional, that means even the statute which has created the levy is beyond the Constitution. If you had paid the tax, you are going to seek a refund of the tax already paid because the levy is now struck down. For an illegal levy, you still have the time limit prescribed under the statute. For an unconstitutional levy, that time limit is not applicable. Mafatlal says so. Mafatlal creates a fine distinction between an illegal levy and unconstitutional levy. If a particular issue is struck down, notification or rule is struck down as ultra vires the provisions of the Act, then it is an illegal levy. But if it is struck down saying it is ultra vires the Constitution, then it is an unconstitutional levy. The repercussions are completely different. Therefore, these head notes, if someone reads this and then decides whether to file the refund claim now itself or later, he might even end up losing the whole refund because he might cross the time limit prescribed under the statute. So this becomes very, very critical. Don't believe the head notes always. Now, What are the other parts of judgment? Facts. Judgments usually begin by recording the relevant facts. Who is the appellant or petitioner? What is he doing? What business they are doing? What products they are dealing with? How they have been doing business, between which states they are doing, what is the HSN code they are adopting, then what is the demand about, how the issue started, what happened for the previous periods, and also what happened in the same matter before the lower levels. All these are noted by the courts usually, because this only gives the confidence to the litigate, the person who is litigating, the party, that court has considered all the facts in my matter. It is extremely important to give that confidence to the litigating community. So usually these are recorded in the order. This portion will be concluded by saying, so in these background facts, the question which arises for our consideration is this. So that's how the question will be framed. Next, courts are duty bound to record. Then they will say, in this context, the so and so appeared. They said that these are the, they made these arguments, they relied on these things. Then counsel for the other side, they appeared, they argued, and these are the submissions they made. So these are also recorded to ensure that the court has not missed out on any of the arguments. Usually these are indicators. It can start with so and so senior advocate who appeared for the assessee submitted like this, or so and so learned counsel for the appellant submitted like this. So it can start in that manner, but it need not necessarily always start in this manner only. Next, after recording the submissions, the court will now give its reasoning. It will give the opinion, it gives the reasoning. It will say, we have heard the both sides and we have considered the submissions which are made. And this is the question of law which we are required to deal with. So when they say this, this part of judgment can be relied on precedent, because it says what they have done. It says what is the question of law they are doing, and they will give what the court holds with respect to that particular matter. This is called the ratio of the judgment. This is the final decision in the matter, and this will be relied on as precedent. This will be called out on a case-to-case basis, because in every case we have to search for what is the final decision of the court, and that we have to take out. And that will be the ultimate, if you can say, hello, yeah, that will be the judgment which is passed by the court. Now, the ultimate decision made by the court after hearing both sides, applying its own reasoning, this will be the final part of the judgment. Therefore, for all these reasons, blah, 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 we hold this, that the ultimate order which is passed in the matter. Just 1 second. Now, which has the precedential value? The court, when it gives the reasoning for arriving at a particular decision, that has the precedential value. The parties may argue in whatever manner they want. Parties may argue that the other side is totally wrong, the order is wrong, etc. The other side may argue assessee is wrong. Just because they say that won't become part, it may be a part of the whole judgment as a document, but those do not have any binding effect on anyone. When we argue a matter, we have to only see what the court says. Whatever was argued becomes irrelevant for us. Just because somebody argued something in a matter, that does not become the ratio of the particular matter. Even within this portion, some statements or proportional assertions can be relied on as precedent if the court says so. If the court makes some statements, that can also be read upon, but not the arguments which are made by the parties involved. Now there is a decision, which is in the form of a judgment, final judgment. Now, what can be read upon, what cannot be read upon as a precedent, that we are going to see. Within a judgment, there is going to be at least two parts. One is the ratio decidendi, the other is the obiter dictum. Ratio decidendi is the rationale, that is the reason for arriving at such final decision. Obiter dictum means in Latin, or other things which are also said. So you can see the clear difference between ratio and obiter. Ratio decidendi is the particular question which is posed before the court, for which the court arrives at the question, that was the issue before the court, for which the court arrives at a conclusion, and it gives the reasoning, the rationale behind why they decided it in a particular manner. That is called ratio decidendi. Obiter dictum is, while arriving at this, something may be slightly connected, but that is not what the court was called upon to decide. When those are also said, these are also said by the court, these are said as passing observations, that is called as an obiter dictum, right? So within a judgment, a ratio decidendi will form a precedent that is applicable for other courts also to follow. But an obiter dictum is not binding on anyone. We are going to see a few exceptions to this also, but usually ratio decidendi is binding as a precedent for other courts to follow. Obiter dictum is not binding. This is very, very interesting. In fact, it was very recently applied by the Honorable Supreme Court in one of the matters as well. There is something called Wambach's inversion test. This is important to cull out which is the ratio in a particular judgment. It is very easy for us to say that ratio is binding, obiter is not binding, etc., etc. But how do you decide from a particular judgment what the ratio is? To decide that, they give us a test which has 3 steps. Step 1 is, you first frame carefully what is the proposition of law. You frame it carefully, what is the proposition of law which is passed in that judgment. In one sentence, the court has held this. So take that proposition as a sentence. Now, what you do is, in that, you insert a word which will reverse its meaning. Just reverse the meaning of it. Now, with the reversed meaning, you see whether the decision, the final result, could have been the same had the court also had the inverse proposition in mind. So you take, let us say you take a positive sentence, you make it a negative sentence, then test whether the ultimate order which is passed by the court would have been the same had they considered this negative sentence also. If the answer is yes, then what happens is, positive or negative, in both cases, the judgment, the ultimate judgment is not going to differ. That means, however excellent the proposition may be, this case is not a precedent for that proposition, because that proposition, whether it is a positive proposition or negative proposition, ultimately the final judgment, final decision which is arrived in the matter is not going to change. That means this is not a ratio in the matter. You don't need to follow this. On the other hand, if you change the proposition to the reverse of it, and if you test the final decision passed based on that proposition, if the answer is negative, that means then that is the precedent, that is the ratio in the particular matter. Just see this as an example. This is a hypothetical example, not something which you have taken out from the case, but just see this. This is interesting. We all know that under the CGST Act, Section 15 deals with valuation. It says any taxes, duties, fees, and charges levied under any other law other than GST, if charged separately by the supplier, will be includable in the value of supply, right? So all taxes other than GST will be forming part of the value of GST also, if that is charged separately by the supplier. This is what the provision says. Now, let us say the court was asked to decide on this point, whether the stamp duty which is paid by the buyer, whether it is includable in the taxable value or not. So let us say there is a transaction, need not be immovable, can be movable also. So let us say there is a transaction for which an agreement is entered, that agreement has to be stamped. Now, for that purpose, the stamp duty is paid by the buyer, not by the seller. When the buyer pays the stamp duty, whether that stamp duty per se is includable in the taxable value or not is the question. The court holds that stamp duty is not includable in the value, right? The reason the court gives is Stamp duty is not in the nature of tax, rather it is in the nature of fee. This is what the court says. Let us say the reasoning given by the court is it is not includable because stamp duty is not in the nature of tax, it is in the nature of fee, right? This is what it says. So let us take the proposition. The reason given by the court is stamp duty is not in the nature of tax. Stamp duty is not in the nature of tax, therefore not includable. Now let us say stamp duty is in the nature of tax. Is it includable or not? We ask that question. Now we go back. The provision says taxes, duties, fees and charges. So whether stamp duty is tax or a fee, in both situations it is includable. So the proposition is stamp duty is not in the nature of tax. That is the proposition. You reverse the proposition, you will say stamp duty is in the nature of tax. So stamp duty is not in the nature of tax, the court arrived at a conclusion. If the stamp duty is in the nature of tax, then what will happen? See the conclusion, it will say any taxes, duties, then they should not have arrived at this conclusion at all. So therefore, in this case, when you reverse, you will finally come to a conclusion that the court has decided on an irrelevant aspect. Court should have decided based on whether it is charged separately by the supplier or not. By relying on something irrelevant, this whole thing loses its precedential value. This is what is called a Wormbox inversion test. It was a test which was developed by a Harvard professor. It is not something which was there in judgments, but recently in the Indian courts, this test has been applied. So now I have already said, we have already applied these judgments in a decision of the Supreme Court, namely State of Gujarat versus Utility Users Association. So therefore, this becomes important for us as a test. Now it has got this, the blessing of the Indian courts. So we can start applying this. There is another very important judgment. There was a judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Rayala Corporation. In Rayala Corporation, the Supreme Court decided on the applicability of Section 6 of the General Clause. In fact, it was a Constitution bench judgment. It decided on Section 6 of the General Clause Act, whether it is applicable to certain rules made under FERA, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. The court first said, the first conclusion which the court arrived at is Section 6 of the General Clause Act applies only to repeal of acts. It will not apply to repeal of rules. This is the first conclusion they arrived at. Section 6 of General Clause Act applies to repeal of acts. It will not apply to repeal of rules. But the issue in that case was relating to repeal of a rule. There was a particular rule which was omitted. The question was whether omission amounts to repeal or not. This was the issue before the court. Once the court decided in Rayala Corporation that Section 6 will not apply to repeal of rules, it should have stopped there. The court further went on to hold that repeal is not omission. So the repeal will not include omission. This also the court further went on to hold. Then subsequently in another income tax matter in fiber boards, this is only a division bench, only 2 judges bench. Rayala Corporation was a 5-judge bench. In a 2-judge bench, when the matter came up, the question was whether repeal will include omission or not. There the department cited that Rayala Corporation has already held that repeal will not include omission. Therefore, it will not. The division bench of the Supreme Court said, no, we will not follow Rayala Corporation. Then department said, how can you say you cannot follow? It is a 5-judge bench. You are only 2-judge bench, division bench. So Rayala Corporation will apply. The court said, no, we will not follow because Rayala Corporation held to 2 things. One is Section 6 of the General Clause Act will not apply to rules. Once the court holds that Section 6 of General Clause Act will not apply to rules, that becomes the ratio of the whole case. That's all. The court has to stop there. If Section 6 is not applicable to rules, then why is the court then getting into what is meant by repeal under Section 6 of the General Clause Act? Any case in your matter, it is not applicable. When it is not applicable to your case, any decision you arrive at, any interpretation you give to that particular section is only a passing observation. That is not what the court has decided. The court has already decided that section 6 will not apply. Then if it is not applicable, after that, whatever you are doing about that is only an academic exercise. Therefore, the court held that we will follow, once the Royal Law Corporation has held that section 6 is not applicable, that becomes the ratio. After that, when Royal Law Corporation says repeal will not include omission, we are not bound to follow that, because that is not ratio decidendi, it is obiter dicta. That is only a passing observation of the Supreme Court. Saying this, a 2-judge bench of the Supreme Court didn't follow a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court. So this becomes very, very important. It's a very interesting case. There is another example. Before that, I just see one important question in the question Q&A box. I feel it is important to answer it now itself. The question that is asked is whether head notes form part of judgment or not. The difficulty we have is, what happens is, we all get to know of the judgments only through these publication houses. Like in this beginning, we said tax TOL is there, Tax India Online, Taxman, Tax Sutra, VAT Infoline, CTC, so ITR. So we have all these are all publishers. What they do is they subscribe to the judgments which are passed by the High Court or Supreme Court or tribunals. Then the judgment comes to them. They read the judgment. They have a team. What they will do is the team will prepare the head notes. Then another team will be there. They will prepare a slightly bigger head notes, which usually they call as catch notes. They will prepare this. After that, the publisher will publish this. What he will do is he will give the cause title, that is the name of the case. Then he will give his own citation. Then you will see who are the judges. Then he will give the head note. Then he will give the catch note. Then he will see who was appellant was represented by whom, respondent was represented by whom. Then he will talk about the case. If you see the High Court order or Supreme Court order, all these head notes, catch notes, who open, all these things will not be there. It will only have the judge name, of course, the cause title, which is the name of the case, judge name. Some high courts also say who argued for whom. And after that, date of the order, which is the judge who dictated, then the judgment starts. Head notes and catch notes will not be there if you see the judgment which is published by the High Court or by the Supreme Court or tribunal. Therefore, these head notes and catch notes do not form part of the judgment at all. It is only given by the publishing house, right? So with this, we will move again, come back to this example on ratio versus obiter. Recently, you all know that there is one judgment of the tribunal Chandigarh in Schlumberger, which says that education says, secondary education says, Krishi Kalyan says, which was there under the old law, which we availed, which was there as closing balance. I could not transition it into GST because I say that the amendment which was brought in 2018 with retrospective effect, because of this, I cannot avail this credit. Therefore, they are say applied for refund. See what the court says. The court says, as admitted by both sides, in terms of section 140 of the Act, the amount of education says, she says, and Krishi Kalyan says, cannot be transferred to GST account. This is what the court says. Now you tell me, is this a ratio of the case? In other words, has the court come to a conclusion that the Krishi Kalyan says, secondary education says, etc., cannot be transitioned into GST? Has the court come to that conclusion? The court has not come to that conclusion because the court has not given its verdict, its decision. Court is not doing that. What the court only says is, it says that the parties on both sides have agreed. And they say this. So therefore, though it is recorded by the tribunal, this is not a ratio at all. This is not a finding given by the tribunal by applying its skill in interpreting the provisions or any of those. And then they didn't come to this conclusion at all. So it is not a decision which has been arrived at by the tribunal. whether the arbiter of the Supreme Court is binding on high courts. This is another next interesting question. Whatever we have seen now is arbiter is not binding, ratio is binding. This we have seen. We have even seen that an arbiter of a bench of the Supreme Court with higher strength is not binding to a bench of a lesser strength even in Supreme Court. So within Supreme Court, Constitution bench decision is not binding on a division bench if that Constitution bench decision, that part forms an arbiter dictum. This we have seen. The next question we ask ourselves is, okay, that is all fine with the Supreme Court, but if Supreme Court gives an arbiter dictum, whether that arbiter is binding on the lower judiciary or not, High Court, tribunal and all, is it binding or not? This issue also came up before the Honorable Supreme Court. Here in Peerless General Finance, in fact, this was third in the line of decisions for Peerless, the assessee received some subscriptions. There was a subscription scheme. They received lots of money from the public, and they were supposed to return back all this money along with interest. They ought to have taken it to the capital receipt, because this, whatever they receive, they have to give it back to the public. But these people treated it as income and did not treat it as capital receipt. In the earlier round of litigation on this point, the Supreme Court proceeded on the basis that whatever they receive are all not income but capital receipts. It is not as if the Supreme Court sat on it and decided the nature, because if you can clearly see, the present judgment was an income tax judgment. It is Peerless General Finance versus CIT. The earlier judgment was Peerless General Finance and Investment Company versus Reserve Bank of India. That was a regulatory issue. Whether they should disclose it in the profit loss account or not was the kind of issue which was going on as an NBFC, how they should disclose. In that judgment, while deciding on various things and application of certain RBI regulations, etc., the Supreme Court proceeded on the basis that the subscription income, the subscription collection which the company receives, they are all in the nature of capital receipts. They proceed on that basis. They don't decide, but they proceed on the basis that these are capital receipts. Based on that, now the Supreme Court division bench, that was a constitution bench, Supreme Court division bench said the Supreme Court has proceeded on the basis that it is a capital receipt, though that is not the ratio decidendi of the Supreme Court, though it is only a passing observation, general observation of the Supreme Court, that will still be binding on the High Court. So Supreme Court is not saying it will bind a division bench. It is not saying that, but it says it will still be binding on a High Court. So from this, what we understand is, when there is a Supreme Court decision, if it is a ratio decidendi, it is applicable to bench of lesser quorum within the Supreme Court, and also to all high courts and other courts below the Supreme Court. We are going to see Article 141 of the Constitution also, which says that whatever the Supreme Court passes, that is the law of the land. This is with respect to ratio decidendi. When it comes to arbiter dicta, an arbiter of the Supreme Court is not binding on any bench of the Supreme Court. But an arbiter of the Supreme Court is binding on the High Court. When it is binding on the High Court, it need not be emphasized that it is binding on tribunal also, it is binding on authorities also. So this is one important proposition which we derive from this Peerless General Finance case. So now we get into what are binding precedents. There is a Latin maxim called stare decisis, which says stand by things decided. This is, if you see, stare decisis, while it is only a legal concept, it is very, very important in taxation, because as Adam Smith says, there are several canons of taxation. One of the canon of taxation is certainty. It is also important as a rule of law. Whenever there is a law, whenever there should be certainty. People should be able to arrange their affairs based on the legal provisions. So therefore, stare decisis forms an important part to ensure that there is consistency in approach of the courts while deciding matters with respect to different people. This doctrine requires courts to follow legal precedents set by previous judgments. issues to be approached in a consistent manner so that they remain predictable, and it also promotes the rule of law. So therefore, this is what stare decisis means. This is also one of the pillars of precedence which we talk about. Of course, Supreme Court decisions are supreme. Article 141 of the Constitution itself says law declared by Supreme Court shall be binding on all courts within the territory of India. What is very, very interesting is there is no similar article which will say the law declared by High Court shall be binding on all courts within a particular state, within that particular state. It doesn't say. There is no provision in the Constitution which says High Court order will apply throughout the territory of that state. It is not said in the Constitution. For Supreme Court alone, it is said that it will apply to the whole of the territory of India. Skill lotto is an example. Now that Supreme Court has decided that GST on lotteries is right, etc. Now that is binding on all courts across India. This is an example of how Article 141 applies. Now, what about decisions taken by High Court? One High Court takes a decision, it is binding on another High Court or not? That question comes. Classical case, VKC footsteps, we know that. Footprints, footsteps, all these cases. In VKC footsteps, Honorable Gujarat High Court held that ITC refund on input services on account of inverted duty structure is eligible. Gujarat High Court division bench held that ITC refund is eligible on input services which are used in inverted duty structure. When this was shown to the Madras High Court, another division bench of Madras High Court, they didn't want to follow VKC of Gujarat High Court. Clearly, they departed, they distinguished, they said we don't think that's correct law. So, a judgment of one High Court is never binding on another High Court. It is irrelevant whether the High Court strength is 2 judges, 5 judges, 1 judge, etc. In other words, let us say a division bench of Gujarat High Court decided in favor of SC. That doesn't mean a single judge in Madras High Court has to decide in favor. No. Even the division bench judgment is not binding on the single judge because this single judge is operating in a completely different state and a different jurisdiction. So judgment of one High Court is never binding on another High Court. But I was saying there is no equivalent of Article 141 for High Courts. But Supreme Court in East India Commercial says law declared by High Court is binding on all authorities and tribunals under its jurisdiction, even in the presence of contrary decision of other High Courts. So VKC footsteps decides in favor of the SC in Gujarat. Madras High Court says no credit is not refund is not available. Now for a tribunal or an officer in Gujarat, what should he follow? Should he follow Gujarat High Court decision or should he follow Madras High Court decision? East India Commercial clearly says for an officer in Gujarat, only Gujarat High Court will apply. Madras High Court will not apply because it's a different jurisdiction. Even if Madras High Court has taken a different stand, that will not apply to all assessments in Gujarat. For Gujarat, only Gujarat High Court will apply. This is what it says. Now, the next question that comes is, this is all fine, but let us say jurisdictional High Court has not taken any stand. So can I say the decision taken by another High Court will be binding on my tribunal? So let us say, for an example, Gujarat High Court has decided VKC footsteps. Madras High Court has not decided. Or let us say now Delhi High Court has not decided. So in Delhi, can we say that Gujarat High Court decision will be binding? Can we say there also the Bombay High Court in Thana Electricity Board says that is not the case. In fact, there is one Delhi High Court also, Suresh Desai. These judgments say that the judgments of the High Court will extend only to that state. It cannot go beyond that state. Whether in the other state there is a decision, there is no decision, etc. But it is not binding on the tribunals and other courts which are formed in those other states. So judgment of a High Court is binding only within that judgment, that jurisdiction. Right? Then we will move on to the next one. What about referral to larger bench? So let us say there is one bench. It disagrees with a decision of another coordinate bench. So two judge bench disagrees with another two judge bench, or one two judge bench decides in one way, another two judge bench has already decided in another way. Now the third matter has come. In the third matter, if you are the judge, will you follow the first judgment or will you follow the second judgment? What should you do? Ideally, you have to refer the matter to a larger bench, because there are two judgments, both are contradicting each other. You cannot decide, you cannot give a third view, you cannot choose, etc. You will ideally refer the matter to a larger bench, so that the larger bench will finally give a conclusive judgment in the matter. This is what Atmanam says. But let us say there is a three judge bench which has already passed an order. I am a two judge bench, but I don't agree with the three judge bench. Am I duty bound to follow? Three judge bench has passed an order. I am only two judge. I don't agree with the three judge, but still I have to only write the same judgment. No, it is not like that. If the two judge or a single judge, if he wants to disagree, he can disagree. And what he will do, he will get the matter listed before the three judge bench. So there is a three judge bench that has passed a judgment. I am a single judge. I disagree with the three judge bench. What should I do? I should refer the matter not to five judge bench. I should refer the matter to another three judge bench. Another three judge bench will sit and decide whether the earlier three judge bench is right or wrong. If the other three judge bench decides that the first three judge bench is wrong, then that three judge bench will refer the matter to higher bench constitution. It will refer the matter to five judge. So that is how it is done. Please remember, this two judge, three judge, etc. are all within the same court. A tribunal cannot say I disagree with the High Court. That can never be done. Tribunal should always follow High Court, which I said as per East India Commercial. Within the High Court or Supreme Court, a single judge can disagree with a division bench. If he disagrees, then he will refer the matter to division bench. Division bench will sit and decide whether the first division bench is right or wrong. If the division bench disagrees with the first division bench, then the matter will then get referred to larger bench. This is what civil products say. These are all extremely important for us to decide what we can say to a court. We should not be asking for a relief which they cannot give. So it is extremely important for us. I'm just seeing a couple of questions here. Let me take this up. In case High Court decision is challenged at Supreme Court, then whether High Court decision is binding on lower authorities? It's a very good question. High Court has passed an order that has been taken up before the Supreme Court. Then whether High Court order will be binding on lower authorities? Answer is yes. We are going to see it later also. It does not lose its precedential value. If two judges do not agree in one matter, whether that would be referred to larger bench? Of course, that will also be done. They can refer it to a third member reference, or they can, in fact, how it is done is they don't refer to larger bench. Two judges disagree, then they pass an order, then the matter is placed before a third judge for giving its opinion. Third judge may concur with first judge, third judge may concur with second judge, whichever they want, and ultimately, as per majority, the matter will be decided. They won't refer the matter to larger bench. That's called a third member reference or a third judge reference. Now, whatever we have so far seen are all what constitutes binding precedent. Now, what I'm going to deal with is what all do not constitute binding precedent, right? These are some exceptions per incurium. A judgment passed by the Supreme Court, but I sitting in the High Court feel that I will not follow the Supreme Court. Can I do that? So far I have said that is just impossible. Supreme Court says thing, even an arbiter of Supreme Court is binding on High Court. This is what I have so far said. Now I'm going to differ with what I said because there are a few exceptions to that particular rule. The first exception is called per incurium. It is in fact also called as per ignoratium, because when a judgment is passed in ignorance of some statutory provision or in ignorance of a case law which is binding, then what happens is this judgment is said to be passed in carelessness and it won't enjoy the status of a stare decisis. You cannot say it stands decided, that is the final word. You cannot say that. That is called per incurium. It is very significant because if a court makes an error, and that is obviously an error against the law of the land, The subsequent judges should not say it is wrong, but I will perpetuate the mistake. They cannot say, let the wrong be continued. Nobody can say that. If there is a wrong which is identified, that needs to be corrected. So therefore, what they say is, per incurium is a disease, don't allow it to spread. If you find a judgment to be per incurium, stop it there. You pass an order saying that the judgment is not binding on you, and you come to the correct proposition. This is possible. So a tribunal can disagree with Supreme Court if the tribunal thinks and records and gives reasons that the Supreme Court order is per incurium. What can be per incurium? Tribunal cannot say Supreme Court order is per incurium because it didn't consider a High Court judgment. Because Supreme Court is not bound to consider High Court judgment. That will be wrong. What the tribunal can say is Supreme Court has not considered a larger bench of Supreme Court, or a High Court has not considered a Supreme Court order. High Court order can be per incurium. So therefore, what is important is a judgment can be per incurium only if it does not consider a binding precedent, or it does not consider a specific express provision in law. Without seeing the legal position, if something is passed, some order is passed, that can be per incurium. So we are not usually in per incurium, we are talking about losing sight of something important. We are not talking about the reasoning or logic. That is usually how we see it. Whenever you talk about per incurium, there is also a concept of sub silentio. Synthetics and chemicals is a very important case. It's a pleasure to read. All of you should read this judgment. There are two judgments. One is a constitution judgment followed by a division bench judgment of synthetics and chemicals. The issue before the court there was whether this industrial alcohol, whether that should be treated as an alcohol fit for human consumption, because an alcohol fit for human consumption goes to the state list. It is not under the union list. So it is the question of who has the power to tax it. In the first synthetic and chemicals, the question was whether a fee can be levied or not on this alcohol. There the court held as a passing observation that no sales tax or purchase tax could be levied by states on industrial alcohol. This constitution bench states this. Sales tax cannot be levied by the states on industrial alcohol. But this is absolutely wrong, because there is a specific entry in the constitution in list 2 in 7th schedule, which says that state can levy tax on alcohol. So this is absolutely wrong. When this was countered, the division bench said the said conclusion is wrong. It says it is totally ignoring the constitution provisions. By holding so, the division bench says we will not follow the constitution bench on this point. The constitution bench of the Supreme Court judgment here is per incurium, and they didn't follow it. This is a correct order. In fact, while saying this, synthetics and chemicals division bench says per incurium and sub silentio. There is a concept called sub silentio. They state both and then say, therefore, we will not follow this. There is also the famous case of Allied Photographics. You all know that. This is a case which came after Mafatlal on the question of unjust enrichment and also the time limit for filing refund applications under central excise. The question of law which was posed, one of the questions of law which was posed before the Supreme Court in Allied Photographics was, if the duty is paid under protest by the manufacturer pays the duty, but he pays under protest, whether the limitation will apply or not to the buyer. So Mafatlal said, if a manufacturer pays duty, but if that is wrong, the buyer can also file refund claim. There is no doubt. But what about the time limit? Whether the same time limit which is applicable to the manufacturer will apply to the buyer also? Mafatlal said yes. But the next question that comes is, if a manufacturer pays the duty under protest, whether any time limit will apply to the manufacturer for filing refund claim? No. So wherever there is a payment of duty made under protest, time limit will not apply. That is fine with respect to manufacturer. But if the manufacturer pays the duty under protest, can we say there is no time limit for the buyer also to file refund claim? Allied Photographics says no. Manufacturer pays under protest, time limit will not apply in the hands of manufacturer, but in the hands of the buyer for filing the refund claim, time limit will apply. There was another Supreme Court judgment in the case of National Winder, which said that time limit will not apply in the hands of buyer also, Here, Allied Photographics said national vendor did not understand Mafatlal properly. Therefore, they said national vendor is wrong. What is interesting is it is not as if national vendor did not consider Mafatlal. What we saw in the earlier slide was if there is a Supreme Court judgment which did not consider the earlier judgment of Supreme Court, or if it did not consider any provision, it is per incurium. But Allied Photographics says national vendor considered Mafatlal, but its interpretation is wrong. For that reason also, I will call it as per incurium. This is not the usual understanding of per incurium. Per incurium means, as I said, it is also called as per ignorentium. So therefore, it is ignoratium. So that means that court has ignored something which is binding on them. Allied Photographics is an exception where it had applied per incurium even to a case of misapplication of the earlier precedent. Now we come to the doctrine of sub silentio. Sub silentio means under silence. That is, when a judgment is passed, while passing the judgment, there was a particular point or an argument which was placed. The court does not deal with that argument at all. It misses that argument. I argued, I made A, B, C, D grounds. Court passes an order on A, B, and C, does not give a judgment on D. Then can I say on D point also, the court has passed an order? No. For point number D, this judgment is not a precedent because the argument was placed, but judgment is not given. Therefore, this order is passed in sub silentio with respect to point number D. Therefore, for that point, point number D, on which it did not give a decision, it is sub silentio. You should not assume that if the court has not dealt with point number D, that means it has given it against you. No, it is not like that. It has not given against you. It has neither given it in your favor nor given it against. So on point number D, this judgment is not a precedent. The question would have arisen, but this judgment is not a precedent on that point. So to that extent, it is called sub silentio. So only if a judgment expressly considers or decides on a point, it can be treated as an authority for that point. Otherwise, it will not constitute a precedent on that point. This is one example of Bombay High Court in case of Earnest Business Sciences Services. There was a judgment of the Kolkata High Court in case of Sushila Devi Mohta. It was rendered sub silentio. There was an act called Voluntary Disclosure Income and Wealth Act 1976, and Income Tax Act, of course, is a separate act. These two are different acts. But that Voluntary Disclosure Act was not considered or presented to the mind of Calcutta High Court while dealing with the issue. The court does not conclusively lay down the law on the adjustment of TDS. So whether the TDS adjustment under income tax can be extended to voluntary disclosure or not, when the question was posed, the court held yes. That will not be a correct answer because these two are different enactments. The court did not consider the argument that these two are different enactments. Therefore, the order passed by the court is under silence, sub silentio. This was applied in this case. This is another, you all know that there is a huge issue going around in the market on Westinghouse Saxby case of the Honorable Supreme Court on classification of various components of railway signaling equipments. In fact, it can even be extended to some extent to automotive components. Supreme Court held that relays which are used in railway signaling equipment will be classifiable under 86 and not under the respective chapters. But while passing this judgment, the court, when they arrived at the conclusion is against the HSN explanatory note. We all know that when the tariff is aligned with the HSN, a HSN explanatory note has a huge persuasive value for classification of those goods. I won't say it is binding, but it has a persuasive value. When an argument is placed, but the court ignores, the court, in fact, is silent on the consideration of HSN explanatory note, maybe to that extent we can say the order passed by the Honorable Supreme Court is in sub silentio to HSN explanatory note. It is open for debate, but we can't say this possibility is ruled out. We can't say. I'll move on to the next one. This is also a very important proposition. A judgment is only an authority for what it decides and not what can logically flow from it. What it means is one has to interpret the provisions of law, but you cannot interpret a judgment. You cannot have judgment on one hand and a dictionary on other hand, and you cannot read every word of it and try to give a logical meaning to it. You should not read it in that manner. This is not a statute. Judgment is not a statute. For judgment, you should read only the English in the judgment. Whatever it says, only that's all it says. You cannot say because they are saying this, this can have an inner meaning of that. All those things you cannot do with a judgment. You can do all those things with the statute. You can give a purposive construction, you can give a literal construction, you can give a strict construction, you can apply Hayden's rule. All those things can be done to a statute, but you cannot do that to a judgment. How do you read a judgment? Just read the judgment, see only what they say, and conclude that that is all they say. You cannot say because they are saying positive, that means negative is ruled out. Doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that at all. You can't derive logical conclusions out of it. For example, see this judgment. This is also a decided case. In case of ITC, the question which was there before the Supreme Court was, the tips was collected by the employer from the customers, and it was just passed on by the employer to the employees. Whether this will constitute salaries in the hands of the employees or not is the question. There was another decision of the Supreme Court in Karamchari Union. There the issue was whether the city compensatory allowance and HRA is part of salary or not. There the court held that any payment which is received by the employee from the employer should be treated as salary. So Karamchari Union said any payment received by the employee from the employer is salary. Now here in this case, the employer receives it from the customer and just he pays to the employees because it belongs to the employees. This fellow employer acts in between the customer and the employee, collects it and pays to the employee. Can we say it is salary because of Karamchari Union? No, you cannot logically derive out of this because in Karamchari Union, the city compensatory allowance and HRA, all those things arose directly out of an employer-employee relationship. The CCA and HRA paid by the employer out of his pocket to the employee because he is an employee. Therefore, it acquires the character of salary. When the sentence says that any payment of money received by employee from the employer, you cannot interpret it beyond context and say Supreme Court has said any payment, therefore this also. You cannot say that. You have to read it in that context. You cannot logically derive from that. Therefore, you will apply Karamchari Union only for the facts of that case. You cannot derive a general conclusion out of it. Therefore, it cannot be understood without DeHort's employer-employee relationship. Therefore, ITC held that Karamchari Union will not apply to this case. There has to be an employer-employee relationship for an income to be treated as a salary. So here is a case where ITC did not just go by the express wording in Karamchari Union. They went beyond it, understood the context. They didn't go by the logical interpretations. They only decided what they had said in the context of that judgment and restricted its precedential value to that extent only. Therefore, it becomes very important. This is another important judgment, Mother Superior, very interesting and recent case. We all know in Dilip Kumar, the court held that all exemption notifications should be interpreted in favor of the department. But now this says, this distinguishes Dilip Kumar. It says Dilip Kumar did not make a distinction between general exemption and beneficial or welfare exemptions. There are exemption notifications. Some of the exemption notifications are issued only to benefit the assessees. In those cases, wherever it is to benefit the assessees, Mother Superior judgment says you cannot read it very strictly. You have to read it in favor of assessees. While holding so, Mother Superior judgment says that Dilip Kumar judgment is silent on how to interpret beneficial or welfare exemptions. So Dilip Kumar judgment is to that extent sub silentio. Mother Superior clarifies that. Mother Superior didn't follow Dilip Kumar, saying that Dilip Kumar is silent on how to interpret beneficial welfare exemptions. In my case, it is beneficial exemption. Therefore, Dilip Kumar will not apply. Dilip Kumar will cease to be a president for beneficial exemptions. This is also an important judgment. This is the question which one of my learned friends were asking here in the Q&A. This is a case of Telangana High Court, where the virus of section 8.3 of the Senvat rules was challenged. Gujarat High Court struck down the virus. Then it was stayed by Supreme Court. Telangana High Court said, Gujarat High Court has struck down. Gujarat High Court order may be stayed by Supreme Court, but Gujarat High Court judgment is not overturned by Supreme Court. Therefore, Gujarat High Court is still a precedent. It does not lose its precedential value. Therefore, Telangana High Court, another judgment, another matter before the Gujarat High Court, they can follow the earlier judgment. It is very much possible. So this Telangana High Court clarifies. Similarly, case under GST where High Court decisions have been said. For example, you take Maxim Tubes, where Gujarat High Court has passed an order regarding the virus of the pre-import conditions in advance authorization. This stayed by Supreme Court doesn't mean that the authorities will stop following Gujarat High Court judgment. It is not. Gujarat High Court judgment is still valid. Brand equity, Delhi High Court has stated, doesn't matter. Sorry, Delhi High Court order, Supreme Court has stated, doesn't matter. It's still, the brand equity exists. It is not overturned asset. Only after the Supreme Court disagrees and passes an order saying that brand equity is wrong, that is when it loses its precedential value. So this answers the other question which was raised by my friend in the Q&A box. There is also a concept of doctrine of merger. Considering the time, I will cover it very, very quickly. I have only another 5 minutes or so in my allotted time. Doctrine of merger means, let us say an order in original is passed. You file an appeal. Order in appeal is passed. You file another appeal before the tribunal. Then tribunal order is passed. Now, which is the order which is prevailing today? Order in original, order in appeal, or tribunal order? Tribunal order means, then what happened to order in original, order in appeal? That is merged into tribunal order. The last subsisting order today is the tribunal order. How you say tribunal order is the last subsisting order today is because doctrine of merger applies. So when a court's order is ruled on is a term that is modified, altered, reversed, etc. by a superior forum, what happens to the precedential value of the court's order? Doctrine of merger deals with how the two orders, lower forum and higher forum, are to be read together. It is not there in the Constitution. You cannot see a section on doctrine of merger. This is done only through judicial intervention. So, in fact, there are two kinds of law. One is law which is enacted. Other is a law which is declared. Law which is enacted is through a vox populi, through the statute, etc. But law which is declared is done by the judgments, through judges. So this is a declared law. Pune Ahmed is the famous case on this. This says that superior forum passes an order on the merits of the matter, then superior forum order will only subsist, not the lower authorities, etc. All judgments are retrospective in nature only, unless the court decides not to make it retrospective. You all know entry tax also a few days back, they said prospectively refund will be granted. So here also there can be cases, synthetics and chemicals, which I was referring to. There is also one case, the first synthetics and chemical case, where the Supreme Court held the provision is unconstitutional, but they said it is unconstitutional only prospectively, didn't apply for the past. So unless the court specifically says so, all decisions are retrospective with respect to the provision which is discussed, right? So therefore, if the court wants to apply it only prospectively, they have to specifically say so. And we also have something very specific to taxation, which is res judicata, estoppel. Res judicata, we all know that once something is decided, it stands decided. That's all. A thing which is already decided, previous period is decided, same thing will apply for the subsequent period also. Estoppel means parties are prohibited from keep on reiterating dispute. But if you see, we all know in income tax, etc., each assessment year is a separate unit. So can we say res judicata is not applicable because in tax, every year is a separate unit of assessment. So last assessment, whatever is the result, you cannot apply to this assessment. While on principle it is right, but if the law is the same, If the facts are the same, the facts which are relevant for the decision are the same, then res judicata will apply even for taxes. That is, if for the previous assessment year, one of your income is taxed, which you claim was not taxable, but it has been held to be taxed and that has attained a finality. For a subsequent period, without any change in law, without any change in facts, you cannot say again, this is not liable, because you will be again fighting the same battle, again inviting. The courts will not do that. Courts will say, last year it is decided, therefore it is applicable to you forever, unless there is a change in law or change in fact. In IDT, also this is applicable. In fact, what happens is in IDT, it also applies to department. If you see, sometimes department says that for the previous period, they would have suffered an order and they would not have filed an appeal against that order. Court will say, since that has attained a finality for this year, you cannot again be challenging on the same point. So even the department is stopped from raising the same question again and again in the future periods. So res judicata has been applied in those cases. TOPSEM India, order sanctioning refund left unchallenged, attains finality. That's all. Refund cannot be later denied without challenging order. So this is that SRD nutrient sort of an issue. Court held that earlier order is there. You have not challenged. Now for the current year, department cannot again challenge the same point. That is what we discussed. Judgments from other tax regimes, other laws, case laws, can you take? For example, in fact, I remember one very famous case of Geo Miller. Sale was defined under the entry tax as transfer of ownership in goods. But in the same state, under the sales tax enactment, sale include works contract. So for entry tax purpose, for sale, can entry tax department look into the sales tax definition? Answer is no, because entry tax itself defines the word sale. When that the enactment defines, they cannot look into another enactment to understand. So when a term is defined under one regime, judgments from another regime may not be relevant. Delhi ITAT also held that in the context of plant under the Income Tax Act in land-based India, they said this decision cannot be relevant under GST regime since the definition of plant and machinery. So what I meant is Delhi Tribunal has decided we cannot just import it into GST Act because specifically it has been defined in this. To what extent can judgments from the erstwhile regime be applied under GST law? As I say, if the new law creates a departure from the understanding under the old law, then all the old precedents will not apply. But if there is no departure, principles are the same, the old law will apply. Take this example. Photography service. We take photography, take a picture and then it is developed and you are given a picture of yourself. When this question came before the Supreme Court in Rainbow Color Lab, Supreme Court held that it is a service. It is not a works contract. This is what Supreme Court held. But subsequently what happened, because of Article 360(29)(a), deemed sale was there under the Constitution, this judgment was found to be wrong in ACC, Jitish, then finally BSNL said, and ProLabs also had come. ProLabs Supreme Court said that this will be a works contract. This is not a simple service. This is what the court has finally held. But those judgments were passed. That is, Rainbow Color Lab was held to be wrong because of an amendment made to the Constitution in Article 360(29)(a), which created deemed sale. Now under GST, there is no deemed sale. When there is no deemed sale, then if a question is asked whether a photography service is sale of goods or supply of service, in the absence of 360(29)(a), Rainbow Color Lab, which was wrong under the earlier period, will become correct now. And all subsequent judgments which said Rainbow Color Lab is wrong will become wrong now. So it is totally reversed. Rainbow Color Lab is right now, and all other decisions which say Rainbow Color Lab is wrong are all wrong in GST. So therefore, from the erstwhile regime also, we get a lot of interesting things for us to take and then submit before the court. So to my mind, the earlier regime judgments also become extremely crucial under the GST regime as well. So how do we conclude? We have seen so many things. To the extent possible, I think I have kept myself clear for all of you, because it's a very slippery slope. We can easily commit mistakes. We can easily confuse ourselves. I hope I have taken steps not to confuse you. I hope we are not worse off than what we started today. So whenever we read and interpret judgment, it is definitely a skill, and this skill is gotten only by doing it more. I may be weak when I start, but the only way to overcome that, and the only way to overcome that fear, is by doing it again and again. So if I read a judgment I don't understand, please don't throw away the book and never read the judgment. Rather, the only way to conquer it is by doing it more and more. The more you read judgments, the more you will become thorough in understanding the judgments. Applicability of the judgment has to be tested through the prism of principles discussed in this presentation. To conclude, a judgment is an authority on a question of law is an extremely onerous statement, because it is subject to so many interpretations. A Supreme Court judgment has come doesn't mean it is the end of the matter. We can always see whether it is sub silentio, whether it is per incurium, whether it is obiter dicta. So many things can still be seen. So it is an authority. Ultimately will have to be tested in the prism of all these principles which you have decided. With this, I conclude my presentation for today. If there are any questions and if the organizers allow, I can take them as well for another 5 minutes or so. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks,
So there
Raghavan
are
sir. Yes, Tapas bhai. Tapas bhai.
No, I was just saying there are a few questions which we can quickly take, sir.
Yes, please take the same.
So the first question is, in case a High Court decision is challenged, I think you've already answered those, and that's why they've gone to answer.
Yes.
In case a High Court decision is challenged,
both the questions.
Yeah. So there's one open. In fact, all three you have answered. So I had put one in the chat box, which
Yes.
I was asking as to, is it correct to address or to refer to the orders of adjudicating authorities and Commissioner of Appeals as orders, or can we call them as also judgments?
They are not judgments in that sense. Judgments are passed by the courts, and the adjudicating orders, etc., they do not enjoy the status of a judgment. They are basically orders.
Okay.
That's what they're called. In fact,
I'll just quickly check.
the statute itself calls it as an order. You can see all the appeal provisions, etc. They will say decision or order to be appealed against. They don't even use the word judgment.
Yes.
In fact, the statute itself says orders passed by the adjudicating authority, order passed by the Commissioner of Appeal. So this, by statutorily, a name is already given to that.
Sir, and in case of obiter dicta, you said that a obiter dicta of a Supreme Court is binding on the High Courts. How about obiter dicta of High Courts? Can we refer to them? To give an example, I think in case of material recycling associations, the Gujarat High Court judgment has also referred that those intermediary would be liable to C&S, and I think there's a lot of confusion whether it's I or C&S.
Yes. I would make a small correction, Mr. Tapas, when you said that I said that an obiter dicta of Supreme Court is binding on High Court. Actually, I was saying that another Supreme Court has said that the obiter dicta. The reason why I'm saying this is only to say this: whether an obiter of the High Court will apply on lower authority, we need to wait for another judgment. As on date, I would say no. An obiter of the High Court will not be applicable, will not be binding on any of the lower authorities, because the Supreme Court in a peculiar case has said so, and because Supreme Court has said this, and that is under Article 141, the law of the land. Therefore, we are saying an obiter of Supreme Court will be binding on High Court. Had the judgment not been there, we would have said it is only an obiter, not binding on anyone. Since for High Court there is no such judgment as on date, I would rather say an obiter of the High Court is not binding on any of the lower forums. If a judgment comes tomorrow, and preferably of Supreme Court saying that obiter of High Court is also binding, then whatever I said will change. As on date, it will not.
Perfect, sir.
Perfect, sir. Thank you very much. I can say that since there is a paucity of time and another speaker is there, we have to conclude this session, but we would like to learn more and more from you. in decoding the judgments and knowing new things so far as the law is concerned, because the law is always constant to evolve. So, sir, from Ahmedabad branch, now I request CA Tapas Ruparelia to give a formal vote of thanks to the faculty.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishan Bhai. And in fact, the first thanks goes to visionary chairman and vice chairman Bishan Bhai and Harit Bhai for arranging such a session. I think, as Raghavan sir pointed out, it's an amazing thought process of somebody to have this kind of session. And I think in today's scenario, it's all the more important. We have all learned principles of interpretation of statutes as a part of our curriculum, but today it was wonderful learning that there are so many principles applicable while reading and interpreting the various judgments that come in. And I think completely justified to the 1.5 hours that were given to you, sir. We thoroughly enjoyed. I think I didn't move a bit from my seat while the session was going on. Thank you very much, sir, for taking us through all those principles and lucidly explaining all those important facets. I think for me, going forward, any judgment that I would read, I would be having a fresh thought process in reading and interpreting a judgment. So thank you very much, sir. It was really a pleasure having you so much.
And yes, we are thankful to our friend, philosopher and guide, CA Jigar Shah, Advocate Jigar Shah, who has arranged such a class faculty for all our members.
He is my friend, philosopher and guide as well.
Mine also, sir.
So, sir, what we can say, him intermediary or pure agent for all of us. But yes, thank you very much. Now I request Akshat Vithlani to give introduction of today's learned faculty, second faculty, Ashish Thakurji. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, to give me opportunity to give the reference to Mr. Ashish Thakur, today's learned faculty. Mr. Thakur is a professional of corporate communication. He carries an experience of 20+ years, having worked with Aditya Birla Group, Arvind Limited, IL and FS, to name a few. Mr. Thakur has worked mostly in the service industry, in the customer service, delivery, training and quality, business development, contact center, and skill development verticals respectively. Sir, I will not come to between you and this floor, and the virtual floor is yours, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Akshatji. I would first like to thank Chairman Sri Haritji of WIRC Ahmedabad, ICAI, CA Dr. Anjali Chokshiji, Sri Bishan Shahji, for allowing me to interact with you. After having such an elating session, I would just like to bring forth the importance of written communication as far as drafting is concerned. I hope my audio is visible, and I hope the screen audio is also there and the screen is also visible to you.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay. So with the full screen, we step into today's deliberation. I'll be very brief, and I'll just try to introduce you about some of the finer aspects about drafting skills utilizing technology. So the idea is to actually integrate technology, how we can integrate technology, and how can we make our presentation, or how can we make our drafts better and full of precision. But before we start, here is a floral tribute to all those chartered accountants who lost their lives in the line of duty during this pandemic in India. My heartfelt condolences to their families as well. So this is the scheme of presentation. Basically, we'll be touching upon the case studies about drafting. We'll be taking up and we'll be checking the tools for drafting. And we'll be talking about an exclusive offer for the members of ICAI WIRC. So to introduce, while reading judgments, one may come across all these things like the context, the case laws, the provisions, the precedents, the rulings, and a lot of legal terminologies and phrases. Like it has been said just now, like one has to read the provisions, and just reading the judgment will not help correctly. So again, there will be legal terminologies involved, phraseologies involved, and in order to read and analyze judgments better, the provisions better, the law better, like, let us today discuss and understand some legal phrases used in various judgments. For example, I have cited here 2 case studies. Basically, I'll not go into the technicalities. I am not authorized to discuss the technicalities. Yes, but definitely I've highlighted some of the phrases used over here, like they are highlighted with blue color. State exchequer to the tune of some amount, evasion of payment of GST. Furthermore, moving down, it says to decongest the jails, outbreak. So it is about a particular decision, it is about a particular case. On the right hand side, there is yet another case talking about Bharti Airtel Limited versus Union of India and others. Over there as well, like, I've highlighted some of the phrases used, some of the terminologies used, prejudice, statutory features prescribed under so and so act. So this actually would mean, the meaning I've just tried to decipher. As we all know, these are very easy terminologies, like state exchequer, we mean the treasury of state, to the tune of means to the extent of, evasion of payment means avoidance or not to pay, to decongest means to lessen the crowd or occupancy, and so on. So we have all these things coming up and all these things counting while we try to draft, or while we try to write, or while we try to make up the case. So very quickly, I'll be coming to the other part of the same point, and I'd like to put it like whatever we read or analyze and interpret, it goes on to form our understanding. We deploy our understanding further to respond, to react over the same topic by the way of either say pleading, by arguing, discussions, replying. These are some of the ways in which we respond. And this holds good even for the CAs as well. It is even valid for the case of CA professionals. So filing replies, responding to a notice or so cause notice, etc. requires a CA to convert that understanding into an effective written draft for the purpose of submission with various statutory authorities at various levels. Therefore, let us check out the importance and salient features which are involved in written communication, and how we can make it better, and how we can integrate technology, and how some of the examples mentioned over here can actually help us. I've tried to create a comparative analysis of chartered accountants versus the other professionals. Why drafting skills are more important for CAs? It is, I'll just enumerate some, like, there are, the CAs are the part of core management team. CAs deal with high impact resolutions, high impact processes, decision making, power waste in them. They are the most trusted professionals by the side of management and so on. Therefore, and again, wrong interpretation or maybe wrong filing may have a huge negative impact on the client of the CAs or on the organization with whom the CA may be associated with, while it is not the case with other professionals. This is what this slide particularly intends to say. So there are certain best strategies. So if we talk about theories, we can say anything like, there are best strategies for legal persuasive writing, like persuasive means convincing. So the focus needs to be on how effective it can be or how interest creating it can be. So the basic idea over here is to tell a story. Story means not a fake story, but story means to represent the whole case in a lucid manner, to represent a case with full details such that neither it loses the points, the facts, and neither it loses the attention as well. Proofreading is one of them. Once you are done with, we must proofread or write up. And most of the people and professionals, they choose to proofread from the end of the document while you have written, because ideally it becomes so like, you know, our mind is not ready to believe that there would be any mistake. So therefore, instead of beginning from the very first page or from the initial level, it is always suggested, it is a tried and tested technique to start with the end portion of the write-up which you have written. And then ultimately you can review, you can evaluate, because there is no such thing as write-up. Each and every write-up is rewritten. Each and every write-up is re-evaluated. It is recalibrated. It is fine-tuned. It is rephrased. It is reframed, corrected, and then perfected. So technology can help us achieve our objective. Since we all live in the age of technology, the era given is of technology, and we have been experiencing it on the higher side nowadays, specifically while working from home, remotely working, and while connecting with larger audiences a couple of times in a day across geographies, cutting across geographies. Technology is certainly changing the game. It really means to save time, resources, and to add precision. And more so, precision is required when I say, or when I talk about drafting and drafting solutions as required, as looked upon by chartered accountants. So coming to the first tool, there is this, I'm trying to bring to the fore such tools which are available currently in the market. You may or may not be available. So for the benefit of larger audience, let me highlight a couple of them, how they work and how you can integrate them. Side by side, I'll also come up with the most relevant one as well, which can be a good suggestion for you as well. So starting with tool number one, it is Grammarly. It is a tool which is basically used for checking grammar, spellings, tone, syntax, the construction of the sentence, the framing of the sentence. The demo document given over here is a specimen how Grammarly actually checks out, how it highlights, and how it figures out the errors created. There are certain errors deliberately created over here, and look at the extreme right portion, how this particular app or how this particular tool suggests. It suggests like there has to be hyphen in between 8, year, and old. So this is the suggestion which it will make, and it will leave to the user whether to adopt or not. But it will definitely highlight what has been missing. It will highlight what has been spelled erroneously, or if there is any construction error, if there is grammatic error, and so on. So it is mostly used by content writers. It is mostly used by bloggers and writers. So the cost is just for mentioned here for your reference. It supports general drafts. Likewise, we have one such tool. It is Ginger. More or less, it is the same. It offers the same. Yes, but it has an added feature of, say, plagiarism checker. It can make it out whether a particular write-up has been blindly copied or adopted from some other source, or whether it is independent. So it has that added feature. It is also generally used by bloggers and writers or content writers and all, but it helps in checking the grammatic construct, the vocabulary part, and the correctness of the paragraph. I would just like to bring your expert attention towards KeyMillet. I am the founder of KeyMillet, and I'm quite very happy to share this particular information about KeyMillet with all of you. It is more than grammar and spell checker. It is a perfect communication, drafting, and vetting tool, which we have been able to constitute as a startup under Startup India. We are offering it currently free for the CA fraternity. We support the Indian legal, paralegal, and corporate communication drafting patterns formats. On the right side, I have a screenshot of a user account. So Keymill basically allows to search the users, the relevant drafts on the basis of keywords supplied. So on the right, you can see that there is a keyword supplied as notice. So from the repository, it will highlight, it will pick up instantly the ready-made drafts which you can access. Once you click, it will take you to the details of the draft, how it will read. For example, if you click on to the so-called notice or some demand notice, it will reflect in front of you, which is over here. It will be appearing right in front of you, just like this. And there will be an option of copying your draft. You can copy it and you can use it with or without modifications. It is very needless to say that, like, this particular drafts would be already spell checked. It would be vetted by our expert associates and our expert team. It carries ready-made drafts pertaining to notices, appeals, replies, and formats also. In case if this particular draft is not available, a particular draft is not available corresponding to the keyword, you can definitely ask for customizing it in this particular manner. We provide for a space as well, wherein you can write that you need such and such draft, or based on, in case if you have a file, you can upload the file as well, like shown in the screenshot over here, and you can submit it. You can send it and it will be received and it will be processed. You would be notified about the receipt also. You would be notified with your draft, perfectly crafted draft, on your registered email ID as well. I'm very much happy to offer this particular services of keyminute.com, absolutely free for 3 months. And yes, why? We are integrating our services at different levels, and we are integrating it across all the streams and verticals. Like currently we are working on the requirements of chartered accountants as required by chartered accountants, as required by bankers also. Certain other paralegal formats and paralegal replies are also being integrated. We would be more than happy to offer it to you free of cost, wherein we would be happy to offer you unlimited downloads of ready-made templates, ready-made drafts, including the legal paralegal drafts, as well as we would be very much happy to customize write-ups for you. Up to 15 such write-ups can be availed. And to activate, you can WhatsApp us your details, your name, your city name, and your email ID, so that your user account can be created. You can note this number and you can definitely share the details with us on 982-450-6376. I thank you for your time and attention. I once again thank the chairman, CA Sri Harit Dariwalji, CA Sri Bishan Shahji, and CA Dr. Anjali Choksiji for giving me an opportunity to interact with this august audience. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ashish Bhai. Yes, Hem Bhai, now I request you to give a formal vote of thanks our faculty, and who has given us also offer, trial offer to use his platform, that is Keymail IT. Yes, Hem Bhai.
Thank you, sir. Learned faculty for today, Ashish Lakasa, Vice Chairman Bishan sir, coordinator for the program, Tapas sir, and Hamza. It's an indeed and privilege to present vote of thanks to faculty for today, and with the changing times and with everything going on online mode, the emphasis on drafting as well as submission could not be better put in. So I'm hopeful that all the participants have been benefited by the vast experience of our faculty today, and I request all of them to have that virtual round of applause for the faculty for today. Thank you so much, sir, for your kind work, for your presentation, as well as certain practical links to various sites. Thank you so much, sir, for taking time from the freshers side. Thank you, sir.
Yes, in this faceless assessment and where we have to submit everything online, I'm sure that we can be benefited with those tools. So thank you very much, M. Bhai also, and Tapas Bhai for coordinating, and Akshat Vitlani for coordinating the whole session. I hope that members will be benefited, and we here at Ahmedabad branch is now concluding the session. I also request all participants, if you have not joined GST series, then do join in the last session tomorrow. So till then, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.